Nothing new here. All right, so let's make a formal introduction for our listeners. Good afternoon, Andy. My name is Claudia. I'm calling you from Washington, D.C. From the studio of Fairfax City. We're very humble and grateful that Andy Jackson accepted our invitation to our show. This is our second interview with him. Andy, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.
And so for people that don't know you, you're a British record engineer, best known for your work with the British progressive band called Pink Floyd. He was until 2022 also the owner of and operator at Tube Mastering, a private studio and recording music mastering. What happened with Tube Mastering to begin with?
Well, I just stopped doing it. I had enough. I didn't need to do it anymore. And thing about working with people you don't know, and it was all remote stuff. They just send me the things, and I'd work on it and send it back.
Yeah.
But it can be, you can sometimes run into difficult relations with people, and people get, it's just awkward to deal with. And it's also, some of the music was okay, some of it was not, some of it sounded okay, and some of it sounded atrocious. And it just, I sort of couldn't be bothered anymore, and I just decided I didn't need to do it. So I stopped, and it was nice. It was nice to stop, really, sort of liberation. So I sort of decided then that I was just completely going to confine what I do to working with David Floyd, his own stuff, and doing my own things, really. And not a choice I regret at all. So it was just tricky at times. That's all.
Some bands are kind of crazy, One guy will send you, "Hey, I wanted to sound like Eric Clapton," and you will say, "Well, you're not Eric Clapton. I mean, you're not there, So don't blame me if it doesn't sound like Eric Clapton, right? Your solo guitar in there, and so on and so forth."
There's as you may have seen, people get very obsessive about equipment and trying to copy things, and David is one of those people that a lot of people try to copy. So they're out there, buying exactly the right bits of gear, and it's just like it has to be, the same fuzzbox from the same year, and all that kind of thing, so they can sound like him, and they still don't sound like him. And a little while ago, we did. There's an annual event that runs over a few days in Britain called Meltdown, which is a series of gigs. And each year, one person is chosen to curate it. So they pick all the acts. And the year in question, Robert Wyatt did it. So one of the people he invited was David. So we did this concert in the festival hall, which is normally for classical concerts.
Yeah.
And we did it as a kind of, not unplugged, but semi-unplugged, fairly, not big gear, just little stuff and things like that, a lot of acoustic guitars and things. And normally he's playing his Fender with, the big pedal board and the big amps and things like that. And that's what everybody was trying to copy. And this time he was playing a Gretsch, like rockabilly guitar, with a tiny little Fender amp and a couple of pedals. And it sounded exactly like him. It's just, it's all in the fingers. And people try and copy him, but, well, you need his fingers, and he's got, David in particular has like big, thick fingers, and that's part of the way it sounds. And he talks himself about the way that the timing of between his two hands works, which is actually less than perfect. He's not, by his own admission, he's not a great technical player, but he just, he found his own thing and he ran with it, and it just makes it sound like him. And if you're not him, you're not going to sound like him, really. So, anyway.
Yeah, I was in London. I told you before. I think I went there on March and this year, and I got together with Phil Manzanera and so on and so forth. And great memory. Phil is a very nice guy, man. Very humble,
lovely. No,
unassuming guy, and you wouldn't. If you see walking down the street, you wouldn't know that he wouldn't tell you, "Hey, I'm a famous guy playing
no.
Roxy music and this and that." No, he's a very unassuming guy, very nice. So I went to his studio and visited his studio, and we got together, and we're going to get together again for another interview later on this year, and he's going to be touring, I think, this year. He's a very nice person, and of course, he's a great, friend of David Gilmour, so he's a very good guy as well. All right, but today, let's talk about Pink Floyd. So I want you to talk about the first project that you did with Pink Floyd. I guess you were engineering the music from the Pink Floyd, The Wall film, right? Is that true?
Yeah. James Guthrie, I'd worked with James. We worked in the same studio in London, as house engineers. And he'd left and gone on to do the Wall album. And when we got to do the movie, he needed extra people, really. So I got involved then, which was mostly in a fairly technical role. We were going about things in a way that was technically different to the way that anyone had done it before in a movie, and we were using our equipment rather than their equipment. So there was a lot of technical things to overcome, and it was right at the beginning of technology of synchronizing stuff and things like that. So that was my job there. But then we went straight into doing the Final Cut album, which was, that came about, it was believed that there was a contractual obligation to make a soundtrack album for the film, which is kind of doesn't make sense because it's already an album. It's the film of the album, and then we're going to make the album of the film of the album, and that doesn't make sense. So Roger thought what he would do was write some songs that could have been on the Wall, but they weren't, sort of idea, about the same themes. And then it was worked out that they didn't need to do a contractual album at all. But we'd already started, so we just carried on, and that's what the final cut was. And that's where I really sort of started engineering with them, because very often we would, to get things to get through it, or we'd split up. So one of us, I tended to go and work with Roger at that point at his studio, and James would go and work with David at his studio, and we'd bring stuff together. So yeah, that's the first time I sort of started recording with them, and then again, almost straight away, Roger went straight into doing pros and cons of hitchhiking, and James had by then, I think, moved to America. He's British as well, but he now lives in America. He lives in Northern California. And Roger asked me to do it, and that was that. That was me a year with Roger doing pros and cons of hitchhiking, and we took the summer off, and then I went over to Paris and worked on About Face with David, and it just it just carried, and in each case it's just like you become the obvious choice, because it's familiar, and the relationship builds up until it's automatic. Of course they're going to ask you, sort of thing. So
I got it. Yeah, we'll ask you about those albums in more detail. But hey, I forgot to. Today we are talking about Pink Floyd, so I need to put my Pink Floyd first.
Yeah, all right, okay. Yeah, I've probably got one of those somewhere. I don't know.
From the wall. All right, for amusement for the audience. All right, so you were trained in the profession at the Utopia Studios, right?
Yeah,
1980s, right? So yeah. So feel free to elaborate. What were you decided for that to be your, looking back, your profession? You kind of knew when you were 18, 20 that you wanted to.
No, I was finishing my school education. The finish at 18.
Yeah. And
I was set to go to university. I was going to do metallurgy. That's what I was going to do. And I just thought, I don't want to do this. I've had enough of education, and I didn't know what to do. And it was a guy, friend of mine from school, who was another kind of musician at school, said, why not get a job in a recording studio? And I thought, that sounds like a great idea. So somewhere I got hold of a directory of all the studios in London, and I just started writing to them, just writing application, hello, this is me, do you have a job? And I started at A and got a job in a U. So, it's not quite as
no, of course.
No, I just got a few interviews, and eventually I got a job, and somebody gave me a job. Just had no experience. You didn't back then.
Oh, so learn on the job, right? Kind of thing.
Yeah, and it was just, okay, your first task is to make cups of tea for 8 people and get the order and get it correct. And if you can't do that, then you're not going to cut it. So it's real, apprenticeship, and you just learn by watching over people's shoulders, and eventually they give you a go to do it yourself. And it was quite. The studio was owned by a guy called Phil Wayman, who'd made a lot of money. He was a drummer originally, but he became a producer and made a lot of money producing kind of real bubblegum pop in the 80s. And it was a new studio, but it meant that it rapidly expanded, and it started off as 1 room, and then it was 2, and then it was 3, including a little kind of small, cheap demo room, and that was a great opportunity. You got to go and do stuff in the small room as a junior, and a lot of it would be things like commercials, jingles for commercials. And so you'd get a situation where you'd have 4 or 5 musicians all turn up at 10 o'clock in the morning, and by 1 o'clock by lunchtime the client wanted to leave with the thing finished and 6 cassette copies of it. So you had to really, really be quick and be able to move quick, and it was fantastic training, a really good opportunity to get good at stuff, and more to the point, to get efficient at stuff, which when people are paying a lot of money for time, that really matters to them.
Is it possible nowadays to, if you look back to, we'll talk about, the Pro Logic tools and doing it in your computer versus recording in a studio. Is it difficult for somebody like myself, for example, that I don't have any training, that I love music, but to learn that on your own, have to record an album, remaster it, make it better, and so on and so forth? Easy for me to say, but it's...
Yeah. Well, I mean, people often ask me for tips.
Yeah.
How do you do this? How do you do this? And in some ways, there's not a great deal you can tell them. You can give them a few basics, but first of all, anybody that came up through the path I did actually sort of bothered to learn about, mic techniques and things like that, which people sort of don't realise is really important, because you didn't have as many tools available to you. But the other thing is, what do you really need to make a good sounding record? And the answer is kind of decades of experience, really. There's no substitute for that. And I think that's the same whether you're working back in the old days with tape and big mixing consoles, or whether you're working in a computer now. It's still the same, really. It's just, what do I do to make it sound good? It's like, I don't know what I do to make it sound good. I have an instinct of what it's supposed to sound like, and I try and move it towards that, and I just, I react intuitively to it in some ways, I think.
Yeah, many, as you know, right, many recording studios have disappeared over the years. It's very expensive to maintain them. The hourly rate that they should charge the band. Yet nowadays, with a fast computer, with a $2,000, $3,000 computer or whatever, good soundboard and good software, you can do. It's possible to do almost the same or close to it, or.
Yeah. I mean, well, it depends what you're doing. I mean, if you want to record a drum kit or an orchestra or an 8-piece jazz band or something, then you need a good acoustic environment and you need good microphones and things like that. If you want to make a modern pop record, apart from recording vocals, it's probably everything else only ever exists in the computer. Even what I do, most of it only exists in the computer. The only things that are real in what I do are the guitars and the bass and things like that. Everything else is virtual. So yeah, I mean, providing you can listen to it in a way that's reasonably accurate, then yeah, absolutely, you can make records in your bedroom if you've got the skills to do it.
Of course, well, you do have the skill to do it, but it's so more, yeah. So it's so having the right set of skills, of course, is probably I don't know 80% of the job or 90% of the job, and knowing in your case where the album should sound like or whatever, or where you can you need to have a good ear about this stuff, and that developed over 30 years or whatever 40-year experience that you have, right? So
yeah, I mean, if you think about it, there's stuff you can think about it in terms of movies. I mean, there are movies where people have shot it on really cheap stuff, even like iPhones, where they've, I mean, which you can tell, but it's not the point. But that doesn't mean just because you've got an iPhone you can make a film, because you've got to have a really good idea and write a decent script and understand about how to make a film work and understand about shooting angles and editing, and not how to do it, but how to make something good. So if I were to try and make a film, I'm sure it would be absolutely terrible. So I've got no idea, really. So it's the same thing, really, just experience.
I got it. So my understanding is that the recording or the performance on the wall were done at the Earls Court, right? If you remember.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, I mean, we actually recorded some of the gigs at Earls Court. There was going to be, for the movie, it was going to include genuine live footage of the band, and that's an idea that got abandoned, and it didn't. But those recordings eventually came out as "Is There Anybody Out There?" That live album of The Wall. That's from those shows. But originally, it was recorded and filmed on 35mm film. I mean, expensive filming, with the idea of using it in the film. And I think, I don't know, Roger owns the rights to all of that, and I think he was trying to do something with it, but I don't know where that got to. I've no idea. So it's there somewhere. It was filmed. But
yeah. I imagine that at the beginning, when you were learning the ropes, so to speak, you were given, I don't know, a lot of pop music, a lot of jazz, some Latin music, and whether you like the music or you think it was terrible or not, you need to do the job, right? You get paid to do X, Y, Z. You do X, Y, Z.
That's right. And anything could come in. I mean, when you work in a commercial studio, absolutely anything could come in. So, you could be doing Roger Whittaker. There's someone I'd worked with. That was exciting. Or Charles Aznavour. I did a session with Charles Aznavour.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. He was good, actually. He was obviously he's French, but he sings the albums in Italian and German as well. And I think we were doing German that day. He was doing German vocals, and he had a German coach who would correct him on a few pronunciations here and there. But he was really good, and he could just like bang and right. So we did like an album of German vocals in a day. But then you'd be working with Judas Priest or someone. So it's just it could be anything really. So.
And at the beginning, when they hired you, other recording engineer told me the same thing, that you're hired to serve tea. In the UK, you guys drink tea instead of coffee here in America. And serving tea, I imagine that you were, very nervous serving tea to famous people, or at the beginning that ended up being famous. So were you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, no, like I said, it's important that you can get the tea. Like 8 people want a cup of tea, and they all want it different. And how do you get it right? So I always I had a system which is I always made them in alphabetical order by people's names, so that I can remember which one was which. Yeah. So, it's interesting. I mean, working on, Charles Aznavour or something. It's funny when starting out. You never think, God, this is terrible. You're just absorbed in the intricacies of the job, and every day was great, kind of thing. Because you really want to do it, and if you don't want to do it, nobody lasts. The people who are not completely committed only last a few months, because it's like, this is crazy. I'm working 90-hour weeks, and it's like, I don't want to do this. So they pack it up, or they can't cut it. So there's a sort of filter of only people that really want to do it stick it out because it's so grueling, you know. You're working 12 hours a day every day, kind of thing. So,
Really?
yeah, a lot of the time. Yeah.
1 hour. Yeah.
Sleeping at the studio because there's no point going home. It's not enough time, you know, kind of thing.
I hope you were getting paid per hour instead of per.
Not. Oh well, yeah. While you're working, not while you're sleeping.
Yeah.
I remember once there was this in the studio. There was this funny little kind of hidden bit. Like it was like a sound trap in the studio, and I'd gone in there to sleep one day, and I woke up and there was a session going on. It had already started, you know, because I was so tired, and there was just a point where I crawled out of this little hole in the thing, and it's. I think the take they were doing stopped because all the musicians just burst out laughing at this kind of hideous little shriveled, dried up assistant engineer looking terrible crawling out of a hole. So yeah, it could be very.
You haven't shaved for a couple of days. You haven't taken a shower.
No, nothing. No, exactly. Cigarettes and coffee. That's the main diet.
Yeah. When you began working with Pink Floyd, I mean, you knew the band, you knew obviously you knew who they were, but you knew, or at the time it would have been very difficult for you to, I suppose, understand or see down the road having the vision of that will become one of the best bands in the history of music, right? So
yeah, I knew the music, and you know, fortunately, I'm a big fan. You know, I love the music, which isn't necessarily the case. I mean, I know people that have ended up in similar situations to me that basically they work, they work with one person, and it's not particularly music they like, but you know, that's the way it works out. So I was very lucky like that. I grew up. British progressive music was the stuff that I grew up with, really. So it's not as if I wasn't a Floyd fan anyway. So it was good. I'd never met them before, but I was brought in by James. So, but that's quite normal, really. You meet them when you meet them.
I would have been very nervous there, man. But it's hard to think. See, some bands became popular later on in the year, right? At the time, they record a couple albums, they're coming up in the rank, but it's hard to see that will become, one of the best bands in the history of music.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that you're kind of used to it by then. I mean, I met plenty of famous pop stars by then, and mostly they're just like people, really.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. A few of them are arseholes, but mostly they're just like people.
Were you able to take some picture with them, or for them to sign a couple album vinyl?
No, it's just you'd never do that, kind of thing.
Really?
Yeah, no. I mean, like I say, just because you get very used to the fact that people are famous, it doesn't mean anything. And I think it would be slightly bad etiquette to do that, really, to do that. I mean, in some ways, it's interesting now. If I meet new people, I don't tend to ever tell them what I do. Or eventually I'll say, oh, yeah, I'm a sound engineer. And they always ask the same question. Did you ever work with anyone famous? And I always just say, oh, that's not an interesting question for them. I say, yes, but that's not an interesting question. I don't tell them. Because really? If you say, because if you say, yeah, I work with Pink Floyd, then all they want to do is ask you about Pink Floyd. And that's not an interesting conversation for me. Whereas, I want to talk about something else, or, I've gone sailing and I just want to talk about boats or something like that. I don't want to talk about Pink Floyd, so I don't tend to tell. So, I mean, sailing is a good example. I sail and I'm a member of a sailing club, and almost no one there knows what I do. But I don't know what they do either. I don't know what they do either, because you only talk about boats while you're there. So. So
I noticed that people in the UK, as I told you before, I go there often and have a lot of friends there. They're very different than Americans. They're more American or more extrovert. They want to talk a lot about they do. British people are very introvert. They don't talk that much unless you ask them. Have you won the Nobel Prize? Yes, I won it in 1984. But they wouldn't tell. Hey, I'm a professor at Cambridge or Oxford. So they don't want to reveal that information. Right? Very different culture, I suppose.
It is a very different culture, and I don't think we like people that are boastful. I don't know. I don't know why that is, but it's probably the weather. Probably because you spend your whole time hiding from the weather. So.
I'm not famous. I'm an average guy who loves music, and I do this podcast. But I understand exactly what you mean. The final cut was the 12th album by Pink Floyd, released in March 1983, if I remember correctly. It comprised unused material from the band previous studio album, The Wall, right, and alongside new material recorded to.
Yeah, well, there were a few songs that already existed that were potentially for The Wall, which hadn't been used on that album. I think I can't remember what it's called. I can't remember the title. It was the Bomber song. That was one. And then, as I said, that Roger wrote songs that were rather, could have been on The Wall, the same theme, and David did music for one of them. It was a difficult album. It was, obviously it was the last one that Roger was involved in, and the relationship between Roger and David was getting very strained by then. And David didn't particularly like what Roger was, the music didn't particularly like what Roger was doing. So he didn't, he was rather remote from it. He didn't get very involved. No Rick, obviously, by then. So it was a bit an album by a band falling apart by that stage. So it wasn't. I don't think it was a particularly good experience, and I think it shows in the album. I mean, it's not one I particularly look back on fondly, and I never listened to it, and that seems to be not a lot of people. It didn't sell particularly well, and it's sort of been a bit forgotten. I think, as far as a Floyd album goes, it didn't sell very well. So.
Yeah, but believe it or not, right, from kind of charting point of view, it went straight to number 1 in the UK and number 6 in the US. And although Roy Waters wrote all the lyrics, there was a lot of, as you mentioned, a lot of tension among them. And I think after a final confrontation, I think a Gilmour name disappeared from the credit list, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, well, I think he didn't get his producer credit or something. That Roger felt he hadn't contributed as much as he should have done, which I think was fair, and I think David recognised that. So his production credit was removed, which was a deal they struck. I think he, the financial settlement stayed the same, but the credit was removed. Yeah, so it was a difficult time. I mean, there's always. It's interesting. It's been interesting to me. What was it called? Let It Be, the Beatles' new cut of all that those sessions, the Savile Row and all of that sessions. It was really interesting to watch the dynamic in that band, in the Beatles, and see how much the same issues come up, which is that you get people that want to work at a different pace from each other, and it gradually gets more and more extreme. So Roger, and in the case of the Beatles, Paul McCartney, were always pushing it forward, wanting to go, and David and John Lennon were being much more relaxed about it, and that tension about how fast do we walk, how fast do we run, just becomes increasingly difficult once the thrill of doing things together has passed after a few years. So it's very common, I think, that really good partnerships which have a certain tension in them that make something really good, after a while that tension becomes something that the people in it, they just can't be bothered with the tension anymore, and it all falls apart. So certainly watching that, it wasn't quite the end of the Beatles, but it was just about the end of the Beatles in that film. It's like, it was very familiar to me. It's just like there's a lot of the same things at play. The irony being that David is really good friends with Paul, and I know that Roger was an enormous admirer of John Lennon, so they sort of picked the wrong one. They picked the wrong ones, really. Anyway. So, yeah, I think it's very difficult to keep partnerships. Productive partnerships often involve a lot of tension, and in the end, the people involved can't be bothered with the tension anymore, so they figure
that's like a real life, right? Like a marriage, right? You marry, met Johnny or whatever, and things down the road don't work out, and people get divorced, and things happen along the way. There are many reasons. The great bands like the Pink Floyd guy, the Led Zeppelin guy, the Genesis guys, and so forth. They're great for that many years, and for one reason or another, they broke up. Fight, rights. I want to get more money than you. I want to get 80-20% because I'm doing all the lyrics or whatever. And I suppose that's part of life. I think, So.
Yeah, and there's a couple of bands in particular where they managed to stay together.
Yeah,
and it's very deliberate. I mean, an interesting one was REM.
Yeah.
Right at the beginning, Peter Buck researched all the reasons that bands break up, and he made sure that none of those happened. So they always divided the money equally, and they sort of they headed off all the problems before they happened, very deliberately and very consciously. And of course, they never had it. Nobody ever, until somebody eventually retired, they kept the band together. And it's the same with U2.
U2.
Yeah, I mean, so they divide. Despite the fact that obviously it is an unequal partnership in terms of creating stuff. So Bono and Edge are the driving forces. They still divide all the money equally and things like that, and everybody has a cool attitude about it, and they stay together. So, and it's not just about money. It's about whether it's about getting your own way, getting a sense of being, getting the kudos you think you deserve. There's all sorts of things, and women. I mean, not women, partners. That when you start out, you're married to the band, and then you become married to somebody else, and there's a tension there, or can be a tension there, and you have to be really careful about that. Which again saw it with the Beatles, which is John bringing Yoko in, and it's not that Yoko did anything, but it's just, he was no longer married to Paul. I
know exactly what you mean, and yeah, some bands, like you said, they're able to manage. I don't know, you do, right? They're going to start doing a tour now in the United States. They're playing in Las Vegas. They're doing a residency, and so basically, some band, okay, let's do another 100 gigs all over the world, and then we split up. We disappear for 4 years. We make good money that year. Then I will see you in 3 years from now until we have new material. They come back together as a group, as a band, and so forth, as opposed to be on the road all the time, where more tension, and things, ego and money and whatever, get in the way, So.
I mean, I don't, there's only a limited amount of it I know about U2, but I know they've very carefully, whenever they see that things are getting difficult, they do something about it. So I know, there's one point where they rediscovered, going and working in a smelly basement and things like that, because that was what made them write good music in the first place, and it got too easy. So they, the deliberate consciousness of we really want this we really want this to work. We really want this to stay together. And depends how important that is to you, or if you want to get your own way.
Yeah, yeah, easy for me to say, I suppose. Yeah, some bands like I don't know, the Genesis fan all over the world, they don't want Genesis to disappear, although they will not allow them to retire. Phil Collins cannot do it anymore, but the band say no, let's get back together in a couple of years. We'll wait for you guys.
Yeah,
it's difficult. The fans are crazy, me included too. And so for that particular project, you were able to remix for the theater, for the cinema, because it's playing track for the cinema, doesn't work that well. It's a
no. It was all the wall. Yeah, no, it was all remixed in the dubbing theatre was a cinema environment, so it was remixed for that specifically, because it's a very different format, and it sounds different there, and there's all sorts of things. So yeah, it was done specifically for that, which I think you do have to really. Just it wouldn't have worked to just play back the album. So,
is it difficult for a guy like you because as you mentioned, there was a lot of tension raising to the surface. You deal with Roy Water, and your partner was David Gilmour and vice versa, and then mix the two together in order to create an album. It must be, I suppose, a little bit uncomfortable, or for a recording engineer.
No. And the fact that we were working at two studios at once, doing two different people, is slightly unusual. But
yeah,
most albums are made one person at a time. That's the way. That's the way. We have a picture in our head of everybody playing together, and that's not normally the way that albums have been made since the 70s onwards, really, since it became feasible to do it the other way. Having said that, it's interesting. Something like Dark Side, if you play, I've had access to the original tapes of Dark Side, and they did largely play the basic tracks together in the studio, because they've been playing it live for quite a while. But a lot of the time when you've got it's new songs and you're working it out as you go along, really. So it's built layer by layer, really. That's the way the records are made normally. So
that was kind of. And then feel free to elaborate on the Pink Floyd remaster from David Gilmour's Houseboat.
Yeah,
studio called I think Astoria, if you remember correctly.
Yeah.
Feel free to what early memory you have from Astoria. Feel free to elaborate how David Gilmour ended up buying the Houseboat. I think he saw he went to see a dentist, like he saw an ad in a magazine or something like that.
No, it was. It was. He used to live just down the road, just down the river. He used to live.
Really?
Yeah, he lived about a mile away on the river, and it was Phil Taylor, who's his tech, saw that this place was for sale and said, that could make a studio, and so David got it, bought it, and made it into a studio. It was quite. Well, we were making Momentary Lapse there. David lost his driving license because he was prosecuted. He drink driving. He lost his driving license for a few months, and he used to come to the studio on a little boat. So he'd have a little boat at the bottom of his garden on the river, and he'd just come on the boat to the houseboat to work. It was quite funny. Yeah, it's a lovely environment. It's a beautiful building boat. It was built by, there's a guy called Fred Carno, a British guy, but he was a vaudeville theatre manager, and he had like Charlie Chaplin and Stan Laurel and Buster Keaton and some other guys were all part of his team, because they're all British, those guys. Chaplin and Keaton and Stan Laurel are all British. So, and he had a theatre on an island on the Thames, and he built the houseboat as somewhere to, to sleep and take the chorus girls, that sort of thing. And it was moved a few hundred yards later, and David ended up owning it eventually after a few other owners. And it's a fantastic thing. It's absolutely beautiful. And most recording studios are concrete boxes with no windows. Yeah. And this is glorious, and you're looking out on the river, and it was a lovely environment to be in, much nicer. And first I knew about it was I got a phone call saying, come and do an album. It's like, okay, which was Momentary Lapse.
Wow.
It's like, where? Oh, this place. Oh, okay, right. So,
No, give me the address. No, it's in the water. What do you mean?
It's in the, Well, no, there is a road.
Okay. And then it was difficult. I suppose if you don't know, I never been inside the boat, obviously, because I would like to visit one day from the outside. But moving the console, moving the equipment, moving stuff, it's a challenge. I mean, I don't know how big the place is. No, it's a challenge. Moving a console, whether you're doing 24 channels, 48, 64, whatever. Still.
No, they were incredibly
big thing, So.
Big, very, very heavy. Yes, and it all had to. The only way to get them in was from the wrong side. You had to take the windows out.
That's right. Yeah.
And bring them in with a crane boat with a crane from the wrong side, from the river side, not the bank side. Is the only way to get
the river side.
Yeah. Because of the way the windows were and things like that. They all had to come in on the wrong side. So
I'm supposed to flip it 360 degrees.
No.
Face the.
No, it's the way the layout of the boat worked. You had to come in on the wrong side. See, I was never there for any of that, but I've seen the pictures. Yeah, it was quite. Yeah, so there's always the danger of dropping it in the river, which would be incredibly expensive.
Is David still using or he rent out to other bands to use or that or no?
It was rented out on and off for a few years. Not anymore. It's very underutilized. If we ever have to, finish something up, mix something, then that's where we'll go. But otherwise, it doesn't go. So what it gets used for is Damon Hiddins, who's works for David as the other engineer. He uses it all the time, and a lot of it is just there's an incredible amount of sort of just housekeeping, dealing with the tapes and things like that, and transferring stuff, and it takes someone almost a full-time job just to keep on top of that. And even stuff it's got nothing to do with music really, but you digitize everything, and it's like, well, what do you keep it on? Well, you keep it on some hard disks. It's like, well, hard disks can fail, so you keep it on 2 hard disks. Well, they can fail, so what you have to do is every few years you move it, you migrate the data to another format and things like that, just to keep it. So it's just with the amount of stuff that we have over the years, just keeping on top of that sort of thing keeps someone busy all the time. So that's mostly what goes on there, which is it's ludicrously overspecified for something like that. But what's he going to do? Is he going to get rid of it? I suppose eventually it will get to the point where he can't see any point keeping it. But yeah.
He got done well with his life. I don't think he needed the money to sell.
No,
that.
Well, quite so. No, I mean, he did actually. I remember there was a point where Michael Cole, there's a guy called Michael Cole. He promotes a lot of huge tours in America, and he'd come to the Floyd and said, how much do you want to tour again? I think it was after we'd done Live 8,
Yeah.
And David said, I don't need any more money.
What?
Robert Plant did the same, actually.
Of course,
When Zeppelin reformed to do that tribute concert to the Atlantic guy, I forgot his name, and the same thing. They said, how much do you want to reform Zeppelin and tour? And Robert said, I don't need the money, and I'm doing this thing. He was doing the thing with Alison Krauss at the time. I said, no, I want to do that. It's just like there gets a point where you couldn't possibly spend any more money even if you had it, kind of thing. So it's a nice position to be in.
It's not my position.
Yeah.
But I hope they never. I hope they don't sell that kind of stuff. Make it into a museum and charge £10. An entrance fee to keep it alive in the term of.
I don't know. I can't. I can't imagine that. I mean, Abbey Road might become that. Abbey Road might become a museum one day to itself. But,
really? Yeah.
Well, I mean, they did that. Yeah, they did that briefly. There was some anniversary or something, and they turned over the rooms, and they had big photographic exhibitions and things like that. And you could go, and it was like a museum. And I think they made more money that week than they made it from doing recording or that month or whatever. Yeah. So, it depends. I mean, somewhere like that keeps going because they do orchestral scores for movies, but that's kind of the last thing left, really. Nobody needs big studios. So one day, I don't know what will happen with that place.
Well, I wish I have the money to buy it.
Yeah, well, it's also listed, as they call it in this country. It's protected. You can't just do what you want with it. It's you can't knock the building down or anything like that. So
yeah, protected. Yeah, it's
the whole world's first purpose-built recording studio, Abbey Road. There were a few places that were not purpose-built as studios that came before that, but it's the first purpose-built studio in the world. It's a bizarre place. I mean, probably a lot of people would have seen a picture of the outside of it because it's quite.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and it doesn't look that big from the outside, but it's. You go inside and there's, it's like an aircraft hangar inside it. It's like, how does that fit in? And it's really weird. It's like way bigger on the inside than the outside. There's a sort of black hole in space where Abbey Road sits. It's really odd.
Is it a stupid question, Andy? Is it with the experience that you have and the knowledge that you have with the bank that you have worked with, it's easy or still harder for you to go to Abbey Road Studio to the canteen and get a cup of coffee, or
Yeah, we weren't in Abbey Road that much, actually. I mean, everybody assumes that we worked at Abbey Road all the time, and we didn't. They did. Yeah. Not in the time I was with them. When they did, Wish You Were Here was the last album that was done at Abbey Road. Yeah. And then after that, we'd only there occasionally, maybe to do some orchestra or something like that. But I've never been in Abbey Road that much. So yeah, people assume that that's where I used to work as well. That I came out of Abbey Road and I didn't. But no, they built their own after Wish You Were Here. They built their own studio. They built Britannia Row Studios, which they owned. So Animals was done there, and The Wall was started there. And then we were only occasionally back in Abbey Road. I haven't been there that much.
Got it. Perfect. Yeah, it's a beautiful place. I mean, every time I go to London, I go and visit from the outside. Hopefully, next time I'm working out with a couple of people to see if that will allow me to go inside and take some picture and do like a small video and that kind of stuff. Hopefully, will work out. I will do the same with Peter Gabriel's Real World Studio. So hopefully, it will work out. Yeah. That's a beautiful place. That's
a hell of a place. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It was in the old. I mean, long time ago now, but it was one of the first times of going to Abbey Road. One thing that was slightly odd was there was a guy that he was just like the doorman. He just like security kind of thing, which was this Irish guy called Jerry. And morning Jerry, morning. And he's one of the voices on Dark Side of the Moon. There is no Dark Side of the Moon. As a matter of fact, it's all dark. That's him.
Really? Wow.
I know I've been mad. I've always been mad, but you'd have to say why you were mad, even if you weren't mad. That's the guy that he was the doorman of Abbey Road. So
wow, I didn't know that. Wow.
You'd hear that voice and you think, I know that voice. How do I know that voice? Yeah. So that was that's his claim to fame.
Of course, totally, man. But is there let's talk a lot about immersion and
Yeah.
when you were working with immersion set to include all the audio and color resolution for the Blu-ray, especially the quad mixes. It's for people that don't know. Feel free to explain, the quad mix versus immersion versus Atmos or whatever it's
Right.
for a great album. How difficult, how complex it is to move it to the next stage, 5.1 and immersion,
Yeah.
quad and Atmos and so forth. So,
Well, each one is a start again process. I mean, the quad mixes were done at the time of the album, so Dark Side or